Hello, I'm Kemal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the long walk to freedom. South Africa has been celebrating the life of Nelson Mandela, as well it might. We look at his economic legacy, the progress made, but query if it's all being squandered by today's leadership. Also this week, a historic deal for the World Trade Organization, but what was left out? We're going to look at agricultural subsidies and the farmers that need protection. Plus, Myanmar's oil boom. There's no big corporations, the government couldn't make a profit, so can these mum and dad operations strike it rich? But we're starting with the biggest story of the past week, the passing of a man, a legend and a legacy, all of which go well beyond the borders of his native South Africa. Nelson Mandela, gone at the age of 95, and what a wonderful celebration of a life it has been. Because there's little doubt about the political and democratic change he brought to South Africa. His struggle, his imprisonment, his release, his presidency, they were all so formative. They also changed South Africa's economic fortunes, remembering the years of damage wrought by apartheid-era sanctions. Between 1994 and 2012, South Africa's growth averaged about 3.3%, which was double the growth of the previous 13 years. Inflation, which was running at 14% before 1994, fell to 5% within 10 years. And South Africa's budget deficit, which was 8% in 1997, fell to 1.5% in 2004. And in the 14 years after 1996, the proportion of South Africans living on $2 a day fell from 12% to 5%. All of that is progress. A country which knew only international isolation and internal segregation, but which now is growing and counts itself as a member of an exclusive club like the BRICS. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Unemployment is still very high, in the region of 25%, in fact. And inequality is a huge problem. In fact, the top 10% in South Africa earn 110 times more than the bottom 10%. So this blanket phrase of Mandela's legacy, it isn't quite as simple as that, and that's what we want to explore this week. We've got two reports which together show you the economic and the political picture which South Africa faces right now and how it might differ from the heady Mandela days. In a moment, you'll hear from Mike Hanna. We begin, though, with Jonah Hull.
Theodora Pule wasn't yet born when a young Nelson Mandela lived just a few doors down from hers in a rented room in Alexandra Township north of Johannesburg. But she remembers well the impact his life had on hers.
He done a lot for South Africa. He's our father, he's our Lord. Because now I'm getting pension. I have increase of pension through that man.
In the first years of democracy with Mandela as president, a new world beckoned, even in the darkest corners of township life. Theodora and her family watched as a government-funded heritage centre was built to benefit the community and remember its famous former resident. At the entrance to the Heritage Centre, visitors are welcomed in the 11 official languages of the new South Africa, the South Africa that won its democratic freedom in 1994, but which has yet to deliver significant economic benefits to millions of its citizens. The Heritage Centre was never opened. Heritage Corner is nothing more than a drinking hole. Theodora's daughter Carol blames it all on corruption.
Because I think now, honestly speaking, Tony, now it's all for greed. It's no longer for making a better world for the nation. It's no longer for making a better world for us people and the youth as well. Because I can tell you now, Johnny, I don't have an exact number, but I can tell you now, the youth in unemployment in our area right now, Alexander, it's huge.
There is no exact figure. Estimates of unemployment among South Africa's youth run as high as 50%.
That's why people resort to nyaupe, which is a drug that they smoke, and then they break into people's houses, they steal our laundry and all of that. I think that's why people resort to that, because they were promised something else, and then something else was actually nothing was delivered. Actually, Tata Mandela has left us with a gap in our hearts. We had hoped that because when he was around, he would advise. He was an advisor to our leaders. Now, I think they had disappointed in a way that I know Tata Mandela would have stepped up and did something about it.
Tata Mandela is gone now, taking with him the hope of some residents of this township, and leaving behind here only a faded mark on a not very well-worn tourist map.
Prayers for a man who touched the lives of all. But in the void left by Nelson Mandela's death, an awareness of challenges to come. The growing gap between rich and poor is a most brutal reminder that Mandela's promise of a better life is still to be realized.
I think the challenge we have doesn't necessarily need Mandela. It needs us as South Africans to face the reality that if we don't do something very radical, the young people are going to revolt. Because if they remain poor and a few become richer, then the young people will revolt.
The fault lines within South African society have become all too clear in recent times. It was a labour dispute that resulted in the killing of more than 30 people at the Marikana mine last year. But many argue that the root cause of such violence is an African National Congress government that has lost touch with those who put it in power.
If you look at what has been happening over the last few years in terms of public violence, you can see that we have many people who don't feel represented by those in government. And the resort to violence is because they don't feel they are heard.
And there's mounting criticism of the African National Congress, even from those who spent a lifetime in its ranks. A particular point of anger, what is seen as the government's tendency to blame the past for its inability to deal with the problems of the present.
We are accountable. And while we can say there are still legacy issues left of apartheid, we cannot, in a sense, bring out the ghost of apartheid as the reason why we have problems today. Today's problems are our doing and requires a political solution and a new way of thinking of solutions.
The death of Nelson Mandela signals the end of an era, one dominated by a group of political titans, bound both by friendship and the desire to create a better life for all. And as final preparations are made for Nelson Mandela's burial, there's a question still to be answered: whether a new generation of leaders is able to complete the work begun by those who are now gone. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
So let's discuss some of those solutions and the economic legacy of Nelson Mandela himself with Iraj Abdian. He's joining us from Cape Town, an economist who worked on Mandela's 1996 economic policy. So I wonder if you could start by telling us what that policy actually was, because I think we can get too easily caught up in the man and the legacy and everything he overcame. I want to know about the politician and what he did for the economy.
Look, President Mandela, in terms of economic policy turnaround, did much the same type of revolutionary turnaround that he did for the South African society and politics. He averted a civil war and a social collapse. At the same time, in economic terms, he prevented an economic collapse because he inherited back in 1994 an economy that was bankrupt, a national government that was financially bankrupt, a currency that was highly unstable, and an economy that was highly uncompetitive because of nearly 20 years of capital market embargo and sanctions against South Africa.
But what was it that he really did? What, was it Mandela the man, or was it something very specific that he was able to do, or the people that he surrounded himself with? You know, as we say, South Africa was crunched by sanctions for decades. How did Mandela reverse it? What did he do?
I think President Mandela's leadership was not about him doing everything. It was about putting a mix of professionals around him, a mix of trusted ministers who he could trust, and they had the social trust to help him on different aspects of economic, financial, and business policy.
He was quite keen, initially at least, to go down the path of nationalising a lot of important South African institutions, things like the banks and the mining companies as well, putting them into government hands. But that didn't happen in the end. Can you talk us through that? Tell our viewers why that didn't happen and why that, in the end, probably ended up being a good thing.
I think upon taking charge of the national government in 1994, President Mandela had come from a history of nearly 50 years of thinking, talking within the political circles of the ANC about nationalization. Also, the global backdrop, if you recall at that time, was about the role of the state and nationalization. I'm referring to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, before the collapse of Soviet Union and the Eastern Europe. The prevailing dialogue globally was about capitalism versus socialism or communism, and President Mandela had come from that type of discourse. However, having come to power, he was a very pragmatic and realistic, at the same time a visionary leader. He recognized very soon in discussions with his colleagues in politics, with his peers globally, and having witnessed the collapse of Eastern Europe, he came to conclusion that nationalization of mines, banks, and other corporates, as it was the policy for 40 years and he had thought about, was not pragmatic, was not conducive to the prosperity and economic turnaround of South Africa. So he made the turnaround, and his famous statement in Davos was about South Africa effectively abandoning the pursuit of nationalism and opting for a mixed economy. And from there on, the South African economy became a mixed economy integrated in the global economy, and that was the turning point.
And so now we find ourselves 2013, Niraj, and you've got the current South African President, Jacob Zuma, being publicly booed at Nelson Mandela's memorial service. What has gone wrong? What is this current ANC leadership not understanding or not changing about itself, to meet the needs of its people, particularly things like jobs and inequality?
I think South Africa, on economic fronts, since 1994, has made fantastic progress in terms of economic growth, in terms of integration into the global economy, bearing in mind that it was a pariah state, sanctioned and so on and so forth. However, on the job creation front and on the reduction and elimination of poverty and disparities of income, South Africa has not made nearly as much progress. Although a great deal has been done for the poor, it has not been sufficient or nearly sufficient to take care of the historic imbalances in economic access. Importantly, over the past 10 years, the unemployment amongst the youth particularly is problematic, and that has to do with the fact that the nature of the economy as well as the education system has failed the youth. That is the main source of anger within the South African youth, because it affects their ability to integrate into the economy, to find a job, and to take care of themselves. So that's one source of anger at government. There are other factors also that has contributed to the social discontent, the ongoing allegations and evidence of corruption and abuse of public resources at local government level, at the provincial level, at the national level. Even the president himself being accused of large-scale abuse of public funds, and the ongoing scandalous way it has been handled. Obviously, it's not something that the youth particularly find it attractive. They do not find it in line with the ideals of New South Africa, and clearly not in line with the ideals and values that Madiba promoted. Therefore, they object to that. They show their discontent.
Iraj Aberdeen on the legacy of Nelson Mandela and where he took South Africa's economy as president. Iraj, thank you for that. And still ahead on Counting the Costs, no big oil here. This is Myanmar's oil rush, powered by 19th century technology, but backed by family and friends. Let's look at other financial news. And the World Trade Organization finally struck its first global deal since it was established back in 1997. Wasn't much. It cut paperwork on the movement of goods across borders. But the elephant in the room was once again ignored. Agriculture. You see, for more than a decade, the rich nations have refused to lower import barriers on agricultural products. That would certainly help farmers from poorer nations to sell their crops abroad, although it's not clear whether poorer nations would even be able to compete or not. Step Varson takes up the drama from Bali.
During the tough negotiations, India was blamed for not backing down on its food security plan. Mainly the United States were worried it would affect world market prices.
I view this as a victory of the farmers of India, of the farmers who are subsistence farmers, resource-poor farmers of the entire developing countries. And there has also been a coalition of developing countries that India was able to put together along with its partners, which withstood all pressures, demonstrated solidarity and achieved this.
But not everyone is happy with the deal. Farmers' organizations and activists say that farmers in the developing countries will suffer from free trade.
Dengan masuknya WTO ini, ini membuat hilangnya.
By including agriculture into the WTO agreement, the right of people and the right of a country to arrange its own agricultural industry will disappear, and this will be very dangerous for the basic existence of many people.
Many worry, also here in Indonesia, that not everyone will benefit from a free trade deal. Farmers here say they simply are not ready to compete with farms in industrialized countries. But at least the Bali deal is seen as the beginning of more negotiations that could lead to more far-reaching reforms worldwide.
Well, let's pick up on a few of these points now with someone in the business. Alejandro Garcia is the CEO of a little-known group called ICE, which is actually one of the biggest agricultural businesses in the Americas, and he's with us from Zurich today. Alejandro, why is agriculture such a big sticking point? Why won't the rich nations give up these farm subsidies?
Correctly. You see, during the last years, we have seen an increased interest from both public and private investors focusing into investment into agriculture. And I think we need to differentiate what is the subsidiaries into the agriculture activity which are covered by the WTO, and what is subsidies that are covered into food local security concerns. In this sense, countries as India or countries as many countries in South America, such as Bolivia, as an instance, you know, these whole countries, they have vast of population. You know, we are expected to be around 9 billion people in this planet by 2050, from which almost 90% of this population will live in countries in development. So in this sense, we need to understand that the countries need to look for these countries where they have most of the population need to maintain all the subsidiaries as much as possible in the aim to provide their full local security.
So is this what it comes down to in the end? And you know, maybe we should expect this really, that countries in the end will want to look after their own interests. Free and fair trade all over the world, it's a lovely idea, it's a great idea, but really in the end, each country needs to look out for the interests of its own people.
Well, just you see, in fact, in reality, when we are in the field of operation, we are looking at the WTO agreement concerning agriculture. We are looking at it mainly as a protective agreement that has allowed to farm groups in developing countries to maintain some levels of support in base of exchange of some attributes and some practices to reduce distorting trade practices. So, answering your question, yes, we're looking at the countries at the end of the day all recognize that there is a great interest in the agriculture, and I think even the rich countries such as Switzerland or many others, they are perceiving that the agriculture is a strategic part of that they need to maintain, even regardless of what it can be economic growth or with it the cost of its subsistence.
Alejandro, can I ask you briefly about your company, IKES, which you obviously want to grow, turn it into one of the biggest agricultural players in the world, not just one of the biggest in the Americas. Can you do that ethically? You know, when you look at the rise of big companies, it always seems to be at someone else's expense. It's either the producers or the farmers. They're the ones who get squeezed. Can you do this in an ethical way?
Yes, you said it correctly. Today, what is our company? We are a company that, in the base of, we don't identify ourselves as a trading company. We identify ourselves as a company, a producer company. This is mainly based on the approach that we have, which is mainly due to the active that we have, arable lands, big portions of land developed for this production. We are very aware and keen about food safety audits. These food safety audits are in compliance with everything that is food safety assessments and everything that is fried and warehouse control retail. Now, these audits in principle will allow to ICSE today to be able to have a full control over the full supply chain. We are talking that we control from the farmers to the wholesalers to the retailers. And with it, what we are able to do is have a clear and transparent environment for the growers. We are able to have it for the retailers. So at the end of the day, we are able to have a clarity environment for most of the parties.
Alejandro Garcia talking trade and agriculture with us on Counting the Cost. Thank you for that, Alejandro. Finally this week, proof that the little guy can get a slice of the big pie. Most would think of oil drilling as an expensive business undertaken by big corporations, but in Myanmar, the prospect of oil is luring thousands of poor people from the countryside. From Mugwe Division in Myanmar, Florence Louis has the story.
It's 19th century technology combined with 21st century entrepreneurship. Myo Win is a farmer turned prospector, lured from the fields to the oil pits by the thought of easy money.
When I first heard about it, I dreamt of striking a big pot of gold.
He got his family and friends to invest $4,000 to lease this land and buy equipment. It's not fancy or high-tech, but it serves its purpose. On a good day, he makes $45, a small fortune in this country, but it comes at a risk.
Yes, there are some dangers, like mechanical problems and fire, and no, there are no rules and regulations.
Whatever oil he extracts is sold to small-time buyers who make $2 a bucket, bringing the oil into the village. Business is brisk in the mid-afternoon, and the middlemen who sell to oil refineries are looking to cut a deal. Oil was first discovered in central Myanmar in the 19th century. During the military regime's rule, land here was confiscated. It wasn't very profitable, so when a civilian-led government took over several years ago, the state oil company returned it to farmers. And that's led to an oil rush of sorts.
There are countless other settlements like this in Mugwe Division. Small, thriving villages set up by those drawn here by the prospect of quick money. It's not just oil prospectors, but restaurant owners, shopkeepers, who give this place a bustling commercial and entrepreneurial air.
But not everyone who comes here ends up making a fortune. Pyo Ne Zan has sunk his savings, all $300 of it, into this small plot and the most basic of equipment. It's an endless grind for him and his wife. Many others have exploited this land before them, and no one can predict how much oil there is left. Still, he has no complaints.
Yes, this job is tough, but at the same time, you make easy money.
He thinks he can recoup his investment within a month, provided the oil doesn't run out. It's a gamble he's willing to take, just like many others hoping to be part of a capitalist dream.
And that is our show for this week. More for you online, though, at aljazeera.com. You can head to the programme section where you can link on to the Counting the Cost page for this and all of our previous episodes. And then drop us a line, won't you? You can tweet me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or there's always the email, countingthecost@aljazeera.net. That's the address. That is it, though, for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.